I want to thank my co-chairs, Goldie Katz and Ellen Primus, and our wonderful Women of Rhoda Shalom Program Chair, Andy Kaufman, for their wonderful assistance in organizing these reviews on Zoom. And now I would like to call on our President of Women of Rhoda Shalom, Terry Sterrett. Terry?
Welcome. Very happy to see everybody and see all the names actually as well. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Women of Road of Shalom, we do a lot of activities and make sponsorships around the Road of Shalom congregation, like providing books for the children and for both libraries, fresh flowers weekly at services, sponsoring the Own Eggs and Kiddushes after evening and morning services, as well as monetarily supporting the preschool, religious school, and congregation. Our Social Action Committee has taken a big role this year, and we hope that anyone who wishes to participate can come to one of our meetings. But I actually have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker this evening, and that's Helen Faye Rosenblum. She is a writer, teacher, book reviewer, and community volunteer. Helen Faye was educated at Barnard College, Chatham College, and the University of Pittsburgh. She is a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Helen is the author of 2 published novels. Her first novel, Minerva's Turn, won the Ohio State Library Award for fiction. Helen Faye has also written dramas and has served as a reviewer and critic for radio stations and publications, including the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Pittsburgh Press. Her outdoor historical drama, Bold Bank, Soft Stream, was the official bicentennial production for Marietta, Ohio, the first permanent settlement in the Northwest Territory. Helen Faye was a founding member of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. She is past president of that organization and continues to serve on its curriculum committee. She is also co-editor of Signatures, the literary publication of Osher at CMU. For many years, she has acted as a study leader for short story classes and has participated as a leader in the long-running Great Novels course. She was married to Ray and has 3 sons, Joshua, Stephen, and Charles, daughter-in-law, Joanne Lessner, and 3 grandchildren, Julian, Phoebe, and Riley. It's with my pleasure that I welcome you to our book review. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Terry, so very much. I'm not muted. Everybody hear me? Yes? Yeah, good. Okay. I am deeply grateful to the Women of Road of Shalom for having me back. I am deeply grateful to be a part of such a venerable and distinguished book review series as this. I remember hearing about it when I was a very, very little girl. And as my husband used to say, now I are one. But it really is exciting to be part of this, and I'm grateful. I am also grateful and delighted to be part of a series that is paying tribute to Violet. I just have one thing I need to tell you, because Violet was not only my friend, but she was my neighbor. And despite the physical hardships and others that she went through, no matter when we ran into each other or met by choice rather than by chance, there was always something of a twinkle in her eye. But I met her for the first time when we first moved back to Pittsburgh after many years. So we missed years of our children. Our children didn't grow up with anybody in Pittsburgh. So that's a missing link. But in the 1980s, when the then called Sisterhood first sponsored what was then the Women's Retreat, we went, and it was thrilling. It was very exciting to do that, and with a woman rabbi leading us. at the time. And the first time that we met, it may have been at the summit, I'm not sure, but most of us in attendance were younger women. We were some were in their 20s and 30s and maybe 40s. And Violet, although she was younger then than I am now, Violet was clearly of a different generation. But there she was, intrepid in the mountains of Pennsylvania, joining in this group, which was there for cultural, spiritual, intellectual, and sisterhood reasons. And the first thing that she said to me had to do with a joke, which is not repeatable here, but it showed me her sense of humor and her vigor and her lust for life. And so in that spirit, I know that she is here with us now. And again, I'm very grateful to be part of this and to be part of remembering Violet in this way. So with that, I have a book to talk about. And one of the questions that I want to ask, and I hope at least partly answer in the next little while, is why fiction? Why fiction now? These are difficult times. We all know that. If we are here listening to a book review or indeed presenting one, we are among the luckier ones. We are not on the street. We are not in the hospital. We are among the blessed. And yet our world is so complicated. And the other reviewers in this series have indeed chosen books that, if not related to the current crisis, at least are related to the complexities of the world that we live in. So here I am with a novel. And if any of you have read this novel, you know that parts of it are actually risque in themselves. And why fiction, and why this novel, and why now? Well, in the book that we are talking about today, and the book is Monogamy. I'm not doing screenshots, but it's Monogamy by Sue Miller. There is actually on page 153 an answer to the first question. We read fiction because it suggests that life has a shape. Excuse me. We read fiction because it suggests that life has a shape. We also read fiction because it introduces us to people that we might otherwise not know, because it introduces us to people that we do know and we want to know more about their lives. It introduces us to sides of ourselves which we would not necessarily be thinking of in the same way if those notions and those philosophies were not thrust upon us at an angle outside our own immediate perspective. There are a lot of reasons that we read fiction. Right now, why do we read fiction? Well, for one thing, because we really do need to have moments of respite from the world that we're living in. So there we are. Why this novel? If we were in a room, I would ask how many of you have actually read this novel, and a few of you would raise your hands. Most of you would not, because I understand that people frequently come to book reviews in order to decide what they're going to read, not to hear something about what they have already read. There are exceptions to that, of course. Often many exceptions, but for the most part, you haven't read the book. If you have read the book, Monogamy by Sue Miller, you may again wonder why I selected this book at this time. And I am going to address that in some detail, but I also have to tell you that I am paraphrasing from something that Susie Smurd told me. And I don't have it right, but I have the gist of it. And the gist of it had to do with small children being asked to describe certain concepts that had big words and had to do with the way we live and the way we live life. And the person who was asking the question said, what is the word for people who are married or in a relationship and stay together with each other or with their partner for a long time? And the response that came from one of the small children was, well, that's monotony. And it's not monogamy. The child said, it's monotony. And one of the reasons that we read a book such as this called Monogamy is that no matter how you look at the word, it's never monotonous, but it is also much more complicated than a simple conceptual word that describes a one-on-one relationship might indicate. So what is this book about, and why are we here talking about it? Because if you have begun to read it, you have probably thought within the first few pages, or having read the book jacket, that, well, this is girl stuff and it's about relationships, and I don't read about that. Why would I? I get enough of that at home. But you also, if you have read the book jacket, will learn that there is a death involved pretty early in this book, and that because of the relationships and because of the death, the characters in it, and then we ourselves, begin to look at the easily defined relationships in ways that we might not have looked at those things before. As with many books that we read, that I talk about, that we think about, that we see reviews of, there are many ways to read the book, many things that are beyond what meets the eye. If you pick up this book and start reading it, you will have a tale told to you. And I suggest that this is a quick read. It's not something that is complex in language or complex in theory at the outset. And P.S., by the way, you learn in the book jacket that the monogamous relationship that we're talking about at first is going to be terminated very early by an unexpected death. Well, why would I read a thing like that? My answer always is, it's possible to read fiction, whether it's long form fiction or short form fiction, for the yarn. For, does this interest me? Do I know these people, or do I want to know these people, or do I want to revile these people? But then in a book of the nature of this one, Monogamy, there remains the next level of reading, which is to say, what are the themes and what are the important ideas that this writer has in mind? How is she or he going about immortalizing those things and making them accessible to the reader? And then there's the third level, which says, my goodness, is there a real philosophy entailed? Does it relate to me or not? In the real world, I always tell everybody, I always tell my Osher classes, and I always tell anybody I'm talking to about books, in the real world, we're all grown-ups now. And if we pick up something and say, that's not for me, I don't want to read that stuff, we're fine throwing it away. Or, well, we don't throw it away, we pass it on. We recycle it, we give it to a friend, we put it in a box. But when we come together to look at things a little more analytically, it's fair to us to look at those other labels, the label beyond the yarn. So what is the yarn? The yarn opens with one of the protagonists, probably the central, the real, true protagonist, Annie, letting us know that she has been single for several years now, but that she was married before. And we hear in those opening pages the reflections that led to the breakup of her first marriage. We learn that her first marriage was into a prosperous family. And we learn also, as we read about the breakup, the things that she left behind. And when we hear the things that she left behind and did not want to take with her after her marriage, after her divorce, after her divorce, we come upon a list that looks like the wedding registry list that many people of my generation actually submitted in the days when we were getting married, perhaps for the first time, perhaps for the only time. But it talks about the candlesticks and the linens and the serving dishes and all of those things. And you see that, but you also see at the very beginning of this yarn, the story of a woman who is prepared to leave all that behind. And what she will take with her is only the expensive and important camera, that a Rolleiflex that her former in-laws gave to her as a wedding present. And so in the very first pages of this novel, without knowing why or where it's going to go, we see a number of glimpses of this character so artfully described and sculpted by the author, Sue Miller. We see someone who is willing to put the past behind her, who is willing to put the artifacts of a conventional marriage behind her, but who also has a foot in the door of the arts and her art. And to this day, she's taking courses about her art. Her art is photography. So to sidestep for a minute, one of the things that will be a thematic matter of importance in this book is the relationship of people to the creative arts. And how does that relationship impinge upon the family, the relationships to people? How does it enhance those relationships? How does it tend to define those relationships differently as time goes by? So in those very first pages, we see this woman, Annie, after I need to say a passionate afternoon at home with a man, and not the one who becomes the object of her monogamy, we see her thinking thoughts that are indeed thematically important to the book and to the world that we live in, if we can give ourselves time to think of things other than the pandemic and the election and the world where we are and the horrible things going on around us at every turn. But we see that. And I always say, don't just focus there and say, well, now what? Keep reading and reading for pleasure. But I am here to tell you that these thematic matters come up to us very swiftly in this book. So Annie's partner of the afternoon says, there's an opening of a bookstore tonight. These people live in the Boston area, particularly in Cambridge, particularly around Harvard Square. So that may be resonant for some of you as readers as well. But there is a bookstore opening. And so Annie says, essentially, why not? And they go to the bookstore opening. And on that fateful night, Annie, fresh from her afternoon delight with another man, comes upon Graham for the very first time. Graham, who will become her husband, and again, you can read that right on the book jacket. My spoilers are not big time spoilers. She finds the proprietor of this new bookstore to be an outsized man in every way. He is a big man physically. He is a big man in spirit. When he is in a room, he seems to be the magnet to so many people. The room that has been described as this bookstore is described not so much by what's on the shelves as by what it's like that night. And many of you perhaps have been to this kind of opening, this kind of celebration, or a reading at a bookstore or something like that. And frankly, I could smell it. As she describes it so vividly, there is the smell of a bookstore. There are books, but there are people wearing perfume. There are those red plastic glasses that are at every reception of this kind being left on the shelves, excuse me, half empty or partly empty, and you can smell the wine. And as she tells us in the narrative, there is also the faint aroma and fragrance of pot. And so it is that many years ago, 30 years ago, in Harvard Square at a bookstore. And if you've ever been to such a place, one of the glories of this writer, who is well known as a chronicler of married life and family life, but one of the things that is also so much of a trademark of hers is her ability to elicit the sensual and sensuous responses to where she is and what's going on. So Annie and Graham find each other. And we will learn early in the book that Annie has been married before, but does not have children. And Graham has also been married before. And from his first marriage, he not only has a son, but he has a remaining wife who will become part of the relationship, and not in any off-color way at all, but will become part of a kind of triumvirate of a family as the years go by. His first wife is named Frida, and his marriage to Frida has disintegrated because Frida could no longer live with a man who had so many dimensions pointed in so many other directions rather than toward her and her child. So we have Frida as one of the important other characters in this book. Another thing that happens as we go through the years with this family is that we do meet tangential characters, and we do meet in the end both children, because Graham and Frida have a son named Lucas, and Graham and Annie will have a daughter as well. And thereby hangs another theme of this book, and we'll get there in a second. So Graham and Annie find each other and discover in one another the things that they are both committed to, having to do with literature and the arts and community, and they form a life. They do, they marry, they form a life. They live in a house, and you can follow down this path too. They live in a neighborhood that is gentrified or gentrifying, and they live in what was once a carriage house type of place behind another house. And as you walk down the lane to get from the street to the entrance to their place, once again, you can feel it. You can feel, if you've ever, and if you live in Pittsburgh, surely you've been in places where there's the house and then there's an alleyway leading you back to somewhere, and it's somewhere quite surprising and quite wonderful. And in that house where Graham and Annie lived together for 30 some years, because that's when he passes away, although I told you this is not a big spoiler because we know early on and from the dust jacket that Graham's death will be a focal point in this book. But these tangential characters, the two children, Lucas from the first marriage and Sarah from the second, Frida, the first wife, John, the friend. Paul, the partner. Oh, says Annie, you have a partner. You didn't tell me. I thought. And Graham says, no, he's my business partner. And that's what he was. But the issue of gay relationships is another aspect of what we find in this book in a much smaller way. But also there is a next door neighbor. And also there is a next door neighbor who is suffering the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And we will see in several beautifully encapsulated sections what that devastating disease has meant for the woman next door, who happens incidentally to be named Karen, what it means for the fate of her cat, what it means for Annie to be able to relate to this situation and this person because of what she has lived through in her family. In other words, sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph, we are being introduced in this book, not simply to a relationship. Oh my gosh, they got married. They live in this house. After openings and after readings by writers at the bookshop, Annie and Graham host wonderful small dinner table gatherings, sometimes dinner, sometimes after the event. But this is what they do. This is part of who they are. And I have to tell you, frankly, that as somebody who has in days of yore been present at a lot, been a guest and a reader at a lot of bookstore readings and things like that, this writer nails it. And she nails the after party, and she nails the kinds of conversations that people have. And she nails the ability to see which people are acting sincerely and which people are acting pretentiously. But the writer and the character are not judgmental. Other people in the book are judgmental. Generally, as we go through the phases of this life and this marriage, there is an overwhelming sense of kindness. And we don't just read novels for kindness, because among the books that I chose not to review tonight were some pretty unkind books and novels that had to do with relationships in the Middle East and novels that had to do with racial issues that are with us to this day. But this is a book in which the spirit of kindness and the attempt to be kind just kind of flows through the pages, with exceptions. But the other thing that the author does seamlessly is go from the viewpoint of Annie to the viewpoint of Frida, to the viewpoint of the children, to other viewpoints throughout the book. So we are seeing this marriage, this monogamy, through many lenses. And as we see them again, we see what is important. How do children view a blended marriage, a blended family, I mean, after a second marriage? How do children view a step parent? And in this case, it's a quite surprising sense of who gravitates to whom and why. And of course, I'm telling you things, and I'm telling you they're not spoilers, but I'm not going to give everything away. But through the course of the book, we have flashbacks and flash forwards. And when Graham does die, and it is sudden, we have been given enough background, we have been given enough flash forwards that we know that this great big man, pretty much overweight, who is indulgent. He's not an alcoholic, but he drinks. He's not obese, but boy, does he eat. He is not a physically active man, except in one place. But he doesn't go to the gym. He doesn't take long walks. That's not who he is. So on that fateful last night when he says, you know, I just want to go to bed, something feels funny, we're not stunned that he doesn't wake up in the morning, but we wish that he would. So through the years, we learn that Sarah, the child of Annie and Graham, lives in San Francisco, and we learn from her point of view a number of things about her, and we learn from her parents' point of view a number of other things about her. She has always felt herself to be kind of a female lummox, big like her father, not graceful, not a lot of things, but she has found her way in San Francisco because she has a wonderful voice. And she's not a singer, she's not an actress, she is a broadcaster. And so radio as a metaphor, and another reason why this book is resonant for me, although her career in radio doesn't resemble our families in any, my family's history in radio in any way, but still it's radio. And the person who falls in love with her voice and her presentation. And it is our pleasure and our joy to find that this is not going to be one of those moments that Sarah has experienced before, when someone has heard her voice and they've had a connection online and on one of those dating sites, and then they arrange to meet, and Sarah can see the look of disappointment when the possible suitor sees her in real life. We will learn also, by the way, that love and success have made her beautiful, at least in the eyes where she needs to be beautiful. And this is one of the many moments of grace in this book. But another theme that arises out of the upbringing of Sarah is that her mother, Annie, finds it difficult to love her. She is a loud child. She is not a charming child. She is not an attractive child. And thank the stars, of all the things that I can identify with in this book, this is not one of them, but she is a mother who is ambivalent about her feeling for her own child. And she has quite a different relationship with Lucas, the child of her husband's first marriage, who spends a lot of time together. Don't get excited about this. Don't get nervous. It will, in its way, be all right. Waters will seek their own level. But through the years, we see that there is, for Annie and Graham, a beautiful, sympathetic, empathetic relationship between them. We hear from Sarah's point of view the long nights of conversation after the parties while they're cleaning up. Graham in his flowered apron because he likes to tinker in the kitchen. And imagine a man of that size and bulk and those interests in life wearing that apron and helping to do the dishes before the dishwasher. But Sarah hears the intimacy between them. We see the intimacy between them, but we do know that there will be trouble in paradise in a variety of different ways. Then comes the fateful night, and the details are so ironic, just so ironic, because it is the night of one of the after parties, and it is a night where people have been there. Sorry, that's not the after party. It is the night when there will be an after party at an event at the bookshop, and people will have been there. And so the next morning, when Annie awakens and finds that her husband is lifeless, that life has gone out from him. And this is another thing that this book deals with, by the way. How do you feel? How do you mourn when you look at that person with whom you've spent the best years of your life and he's not there? And he's not there. How do you weep and wail when he's not there? It's a different matter. But the night of that party is to come, and Annie has called the bookshop and asked the staff to cancel that party, and they do, but there is a coincidence. The day before all of this has happened, Graham has had an old friend come to town, and they have sat together in a coffee shop. Remember when we used to be able to do that? We used to go and sit together, and the server would come and didn't have a mask, and there was a bottle of water instead of a bottle of hand sanitizer on the table. Well, that was where they were at that time. Graham and his old friend, and Graham invited his old friend to come to dinner the next night because that was the kind of person he was, and that was the kind of life they led, that there was always room at the table. Or as somebody I knew and loved used to say, I could always throw another bone in the pot. So the day came when Annie awoke to find that her husband was gone, and she called the bookstore to have the guest list canceled, but no one knew that Graham had invited John. No one knew. How could they know? Nobody knew. So the day of the party, Annie is there wanting to be in solitude. Her children have not arrived yet. And when I say her children, that includes both children from both marriages. And she's alone, and she's happy to be alone. And the doorbell rings, and she has one of those moments. It's Graham. This was all a bad dream. I heard him come up the walk, but why is he ringing the doorbell? And she looks out through the panel in the glass, and she sees a handsome bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. And it's Graham, but it isn't Graham. And so, because Graham is gone. So one of the things that this book comes to terms with, one of the other things that this book comes to terms with, is that kind of loss and the stages of grief. And as somebody said, and I want to get this right, as somebody says, no, I can't find it. The grief and the griever do not go away. The grief and the griever remain. We move forward, but the grief and the griever remain. So we need to turn to the next part of life for Annie. And what is she going to do? And she is going to mourn Graham now. And she is going to deal with the rituals of dispersing his ashes, of dealing with his things. But there will not be an immediate memorial service now. There will be one down the road in a few months, and the children, Lucas and Sarah, will come back for that event. And we know something. Well, also, by the way, when Lucas comes back, he will come back with his French wife, who is very newly pregnant, but pregnant indeed. His newly pregnant wife is a beautiful, beautiful French woman. And this is another, I'm talking about this on two levels. The role that she plays in being a conciliator with everybody, this wife, the role that she plays is a wonderful role. But making her a French woman is a pretty terrific piece of strategy on the part of the author, because it enables her to ask questions to which we might need to know the answer, and somebody needs to explain them. What do you mean you have a memorial service then? What do you mean? What do you mean? So that meeting, and it will be a party at the bookstore. That meeting will take place, and it will be months after Graham's passing. So I'm going to jump ahead to that moment too, as we reach the conclusion about why this book and why now. When Lucas and his wife come back to town, to Cambridge, to the party, they live in New York now, and Lucas is an editor, a book editor at a major publisher. And someone at the event says, well, I want to send some holiday gifts to friends. Lucas, can you recommend any new books? And Lucas says, well, I can recommend many of them, but unfortunately, some of them won't be published till after Christmas, and that happens. But he said there is one that has an unfortunate title, but it's a wonderful book, and I'm going to recommend it anyway. And he recommends it. And the wonderful title is a quotation from an important poem of Dylan Thomas. And somebody says, who is the author? And Lucas names the author. And Annie says, well, I knew him. And it turns out that years and years and years ago, when Annie and Graham were first married, she won a fellowship to the MacDowell Colony, which you probably know is an artists and writers colony where people who receive grants to go there get to go and live and work exclusively on their work. And there are social lives there and communal events and so on, but everybody has a little cottage and a place to be, and you can have meals delivered to your door and everything. And this is one of the touches of reality that makes this a novel with teeth in it. But years ago at the MacDowell Colony, Annie knew this writer. And although they seem to have been attracted to each other, she maintained her fidelity, her purity, her monogamy in the face of one afternoon encounter that wasn't with this writer. It wasn't, and she never saw him again, and he never saw her again. And the new owners of the bookstore have invited this writer to come and read at the next event. And at first, Annie thinks that she isn't going to go. And then she says, oh, why not? Because something else, a secret from Graham's life, has been revealed, and it has broken all of the sense of monogamy and continuity and fidelity and trust that Annie thought she owned, and she thought she owned alongside her complete commitment to monogamy with this man who was bigger than all outdoors. The writer from the MacDowell Colony does come, and Annie does see him, and he says, they have a drink together, and he says, oh yes, of course I remember you. And how that plays out, if you're going to read the book, I'll let you see the ironies of that. And if you're not, you can talk to me about it later and I'll tell you, because it is another thematic moment in this book. We have dealt with parent and child relationships in ways that we don't usually see in books. When we see rejections, they're usually Dickensian in tone. They're not usually this kind of quiet guilt in this way. We've seen Alzheimer's. We've seen sudden death. We've seen the importance of radio. We've seen the importance of the arts and what photography means to Annie and to the world, and what power Annie believes there is in being behind the camera, and what happens now in the end, because in the end, for various physical reasons, Annie is not going to be able to use her camera, at least for a while, But all of these moments are things that this author is able to encapsulate in a paragraph or a sentence, so that we are living these lives with these people. And again, we read fiction to meet people that we would not otherwise know, some of these people, or perhaps people that we do know and see aspects of their inner pensive lives that we are not usually ever privileged to see in real life, because most of the time, these are very private matters. And when they're not, they're usually shared with a therapist, somebody, a friend, or as somebody makes the point in another book that we've just been discussing today, you can't tell anybody, because people will keep your secret until the moment that they don't. And then it's like one of those COVID diagrams. If you tell one person and that person is faithful in the relationship, that's great. But a few months down the road, that graph changes, and somebody tells somebody else, and somebody tells somebody else, and pretty soon there aren't enough fingers on all of our hands to show how confidentiality has been breached and how it is not possible for someone to own one's own self that way. And so this is one of the myriad things that Sue Miller deals with in this book. So why this book? Why now? Why the book? Because at that point, I was looking for a novel that did not know COVID, and that did not know in its way through most of its years the political situations that have been controversial for us, the borders, children at the border. The book also deals with a number of things that I haven't even mentioned, such as a very brief pass at pedophilia and how some people are lucky to escape it and some are not. So the book is laden with moments of love and moments of re-acceptance and moments of gentility, but it also opens for us thematically and otherwise some of the heaviest emotional and relational circumstances that people will encounter in a lifetime. I'm not going to tell you exactly how the book ends, but I will tell you this about the ending. I believe that most novels and most short stories entail something of a quest. And there can be a turning point that enables the protagonist or protagonists to progress toward that conclusion when the quest is finally realized. It happens in many different ways. And the quest for Annie has been through trial and tribulation and loss to find her way back mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to the marriage that terminated at the moment of her husband's death. How the writer handles that does not make it a trip into the sunset in beauty and glory. It's much more melancholy than that, but beautiful and glorious in its own way. I think it is. So for all of these reasons, we read fiction. For some of the escapist reasons that I just didn't feel that I wanted to take us to the death of Israeli and Arabic children in the Middle East and grieving father. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find a novel this time that would bring us something of reconciliation and something of intimacy in ways that are sometimes painful, sometimes charged, but always questing that beautiful sense of monogamy that means commitment to something for life and death. And this book, Sue Miller's Monogamy, Not Monotony, is a book that fulfilled some of those quests for me. And as I think most of you know, I understand that this book isn't for everybody. And some of you still might think it's a girly book, although I would not agree with that. But I would never bring to you a book that I could not highly recommend, because I think it's a remarkable achievement. And in this case, a remarkable achievement with so much remarkable language that it blew me away. So as always, I am deeply grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about it. And I thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen Faye, for the wonderful, the analogies that you give and bringing the book to life. It was wonderful. And not discussing today's problems, also picking a book that was not discussing the problems of today. But this was wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone like to, actually, you can write your questions in the chat box, or else you can just raise your hand and ask your questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Or you can unmute if you want to ask your question.
Sure, yeah.
And if you don't have questions, that's okay too. That doesn't mean I've told you everything.
Right.
I want to
go
may
ahead.
I jump in? Helen Faye, I want to just thank you. This was a lyrical review. I've been looking forward to it. I read the New York Times review in preparation.
Oh,
I thought you put them to shame. I thought it was just wonderful. I felt like I was immersing in this luxuriant story. And so I thank you for bringing it to us in such vivid color.
thank you, Aaron. That's so very, very kind of you. I appreciate everything that you do, and I hope you know that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. And your review was wonderful too, Aaron, last
Oh,
week.
yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed that also. Yeah.
And I love the way you brought the other book into it, by the way, because I had just been talking to somebody about that book and the importance of it. And I thought you wove that so
Well,
nice.
thank you. Thank you. That's high praise. Thank you.
I mean it.
I know.
Well, and join us. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And please join us next Thursday night at 7:30 when Rabbi Jacob gives the book review on Hoax, which is the book about President Trump. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say.
We do have a comment in the chat, and it's from Chuck Marcus to everyone. He's saying thanks.
Thank you for being here, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen Faye. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Terry.
And if you want to, you can. Is it all right if they stay afterwards, Andy, and visit for a while if we want to? Or you don't need to stay on though. I think I can turn it off. I can.
Yeah, Terry can put you as a co-host.
The
Helen
recording.
Faye, thank you so much. As always, it was absolutely wonderful.
It was wonderful.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Terry, and thank you all.
Thank you.
You always give us so much to think about.
Yes, I might have to go out and get it, or go to the library.
I just have to finish it.
When I first started reading it, I kind of wondered, what is this? But then it became very fascinating with all the different relationships and things going on.
And how she handles them. Yeah, well, and it does have its